Hello and welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Danny as we're here in final prediction mode. Before we get into it, Danny, guys, if you could like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, especially let us know down below whether you agree with me and Danny on our predictions. We've got loads of fight week content coming up for Dalton Smith as he headlines in Nottingham once again. Danny, it's Dalton Smith. It's an interesting fight against Walid Ouizza. Probably butchered his name there, but he's only fought outside of France once. That was in Spain, so he's not exactly well travelled. As always, we're going to go straight into things with your final prediction for this fight before we discuss it a bit further. Very difficult one to break down, especially with no one having seen much of Walid Ouizza. What do you think will happen on Saturday night?
Yeah, I'm being any of Walid Ouizza, I would argue that anyone from the UK who does is a massive liar, or maybe needs to go out and touch some grass, one of the two. Um, You'd be very hard pressed to see anything other than a very easy night's work for Dalton Smith. I know we're going to go into a bit more detail potentially in a minute or two, but I'm going to go for a Dalton Smith stoppage in rounds 6, 7. Be surprised if it went much further than that, to be honest with you. I'd be very disappointed if Dalton Smith went the distance here.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think if Dalton Smith, obviously we'll get on to potential fights next and what we think of this actual fight itself. But I think if this fight does reach the second half, it's not a great night's work from Dalton Smith. The later it goes, I think the worse it looks for him. I'm going to back the stoppage as well. I'm going to go slightly earlier. I'm going to go rounds 4 to 5. I think Dalton Smith's got to come out, and I think he's got to be clinical. There's some potential big fights and big names for him. So I think he has to be. But it's just such a weird fight to be headlining. With no one really, well, like you said, I don't think anyone in this country would have seen anything of Walid Ouizza. So we're both in agreement that it's gonna be finished relatively early. Dalton Smith knockout. Let us know down below what you think of that, guys. But Danny, whilst we're here, what do you make of this as a fight? I think we've both give our opinions within our prediction. We've seen Dalton Smith, we've seen the Adam Azim names, European champion. It's we expect Dalton Smith to be fighting either someone like Adam Azim or up at pushing towards world level. He's now fighting Walid Ouizza. What do you make of this in terms of for British boxing in general and a fight for Dalton Smith?
Let's call a spade a spade. I mean, as a headliner, I would have no issues with this as a fight as potentially on an undercard again in like a Eubank Bend and a big show. I mean, it's for the vacant European title, which is still a title that holds some merit, although you get opponents of varying difficulty to win it. And I would say Wally Louisa certainly falls on the lower end of those. But to go from Jose Pedraza, who past his best, but to go from him to Walid Ouizza is extremely disappointing. Now, I wasn't expecting a fight against Adam Azim to be happening in the first half of this year for Dalton Smith, or even at any time in this year. You'd like to think they could offer up something a bit better than this. There were rumours of potentially Josh Taylor signing with Matchroom. That would have been an excellent fight, a winnable fight for Dalton Smith, given Taylor struggles at the weight and the stage of his career. But it's a run out for Dalton Smith. He's not been out since March of last year. And you don't want to lose momentum when you're at the stage of his career and you're maybe that step or two below knocking on world titles. You don't want to go into your big fight off inactivity. So I suppose that's a positive. But I'm not expecting a competitive fight, and it's not one I'm particularly looking forward to, I have to be honest.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. He's going from fighting someone like Jose Zepeda, who's been in with,
That was a pair, did I say Pedraza?
yeah,
Pereira.
tomato, but still, he's been in with what Jose Ramirez, Richardson Hitchens, Regis Prograis to fighting Walid Ouizza, who has literally fought outside France once. He's not a big puncher by any stretch of the imagination. I just got his record up shortly before this video, 19 fights, 8 KOs. So he's coming in, and I understand what you're saying. It's a tune-up fight for bigger fights, but the Jose Zepeda victory. for me, it was supposed to be the one that was not necessarily propelling Dalton Smith through the divisions, through the rankings in the division, but one that was supposed to set him in good stead to be fighting bigger names and sort of fulfill his potential. I know, obviously, you said you didn't expect him to be fighting Adam Azim. I don't think that fight is going to happen anytime soon. Just that's the way boxing works. Who do you want to see Dalton Smith fight next? Because as we've both said, he fought Jose Zepeda. It was sort of a career best performance for him. A fifth round stoppage as someone that's been in with some big names in boxing was a bit of a statement, I thought. One that was sort of needed to get him those bigger nights and under the bright lights. So what do you expect to see next? But what would you prefer to see next for Dalton Smith?
Expect to see next. I don't. I would love to see the Azim fight, but as you touched on, just the way the business of boxing work, like it's a risky fight for both of them, and it's not a big fight. Like if that was to happen in the UK, they'd maybe sell out the Sheffield Arena, but it's not a pay-per-view fight. It wouldn't do massive numbers. So the only way I could envisage that happening is if it's on an undercard over in Saudi Arabia, where they're getting sort of 3, 4 times what they would get here, which obviously is a possibility. I would not mind. I don't know if it's been announced yet, but Regis Prograis is supposed to be fighting Oscar Duarte, the winner or loser of that fight. I'll be happy enough to see. Obviously, Prograis passed his best, but would be still a tougher test than Dalton Smith's faced and a proper puncher too. We saw had Jack Catterall down. First 6 rounds of that fight was causing Jack Catterall, plenty of issues. Duarte as well, big, strong, physical, fresh, but got vulnerabilities as we saw against the Garcia fight. That'll be maybe one for this match of the Golden Boy 5v5 targeted for later in the year because I think there still needs to be a fight or two before, Dalton Smith's ready for a world title shot at 140. There's some very tough fights up there, and I don't think he's ready right now, but not a million miles away. So, a couple of those names I just mentioned, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's a good point. Like you say, 140 is one of the more stacked divisions in the sport. Dalton Smith is probably not ready just yet. He's had 16 fights. He's evidently a big puncher, but he's still learning. I know he did say, obviously, yeah, I think he was ill and had some issues in camp. But I was there when he fought Billy Ellington, and Billy Ellington was an area level fighter, and he more than roughed him up and played his part that night. So I was personally quite critical of Dalton Smith. And then obviously stopped Sam Maxwell in good fashion, stopped Jose Zepeda in good fashion. So I want to see these big names now because I've seen him firsthand ringside and what I thought that night. But I think there's some, like you say, domestic Adam Museum. We all want to see it. I think the Eubank Ben sort of analogy is perfect because they're not going to sell out Wembley, um, or any stadium, Spurs, anything like that. Prograde Duarte, probably the ideal one. Probably get them both at the right time. But listen, we're here. It's Walid Ouizza. That we want to see Dalton Smith in these big fights, but unfortunately, this is what we've got. It's not the best card ever by any stretch of the imagination, but it is boxing. It's good to see boxing in Britain, and it's good to see Dalton Smith headlining. Let us know down below in the comments, guys, what you think of this fight. Are you more critical than me and Danny? Are you not going to mince any of your words in your opinions of this fight? Do you think Walid Weezer could shock Britain? Do you think he could shock Europe and get a win? Or do you think it could be a demolition job from Dalton Smith? Please let us know down below in the comments, guys. As I say, like, subscribe also. And Danny, thank you once again for joining me tonight.
No problem, mate.